the farrowing process, particularly the fact that a long interval since the last meal impairs farrowing progress in cells. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all. We're seeing that there's an increase, there's a continuous increase in prolificacy. We visualize this on the screen. This has been going on since the mid-1990s, increased prolificacy. So the litter size has increased as expressed in total births, but also in the number of piglets weaned. But in between, we find there's still mortality, there are still losses, and this means we need to continue looking for solutions to reduce losses or mortality. And feeding is a strategy. So hyperprolificacy doesn't just boil down to the number of piglets born. There are consequences on other criteria, more piglets with high birth order, and there's also an impact on the farrowing time, which increases not in proportion with the litter size, but there's also an impact on the birth weight individually. Now, if we take a closer look at the duration of parturition, we find that there's a lot of things in literature that seems to show that there are different factors involved. In particular, when the parturition lasts longer, there are more contractions, and this can reduce the fetal blood flow, and ultimately there's a higher risk of perinatal mortality. There's also an impact on the colostrum production, which is reduced, and combined with other factors, we find that the entire chain of events means a higher stillbirth, which combines prenatal and early mortality. So a lot of works recently have looked at feeding around farrowing, and we've established a connection between the ration at the end of gestation and the glycemia at the beginning of farrowing. The fiber content can be an important criteria, and also the time of the last meal, just before parturition. And that's what we're going to focus on. We carried out a test at the Rheu experimental station on just that. So we collected data based on two trials. Both look at sows, large white cross landrace sows. So gestation feed before farrowing, and after that, lactation feed. So the sows were fed twice a day, manually, and in terms of farrowing, that was supervised by observers in the farrowing room. So in the second trial, the sows were fed using an automated feed dispenser, and we installed cameras to monitor the farrowing process 24/7. So based on the data obtained, we wrote down what time the last meal before the beginning of parturition began, the time when the first piglet was born, and then the birth intervals between the different piglets, except for mummies. So let me drill down on the average performance between the different trials, because they happened maybe 1 year apart. So if we look at the different sows, in the first trial, we selected 39 sows and 72 in the second trial, where there was no induction and no major problem, either a major health problem that had nothing to do with feeding or a perinatal mortality problem. On average, we had a parity of 3.4, the body weight was 288 kilos, and the back fat thickness close to 20 millimeters. So the major difference between the two trials was the litter size. 16.9 in the first trial and 18.4 in the second trial. So based on the data available, we tried to distribute the sows in different pens based on the time since last meal. As you can see, the number of sows is not very high, so we defined the criteria so as to be able to distribute the cows in optimal numbers, as optimal as possible. So we looked at the TDR, the time since last meal, on the basis of short, medium, or long. So short until 3 hours, medium from 4 to 8 hours, and long over 9 hours. And look at the numbers of sows for each TDR, time since last meal. If we look at the characteristics of the sows, based on TDR, we found there's no significant difference. In other words, TDR, time since last meal, doesn't have much impact. Just because you have a particular weight, a particular parity, a particular back fat thickness, doesn't mean you can able to predict, okay, farrowing is going to start now or in a little while longer. Okay, same thing in the second trial. However, if you look at a different criteria, the rate of stillbirths at birth, we had enough numbers there. Now, for short TDRs, we find that there's no major difference between short and medium TDRs in both trials. However, when the TDR is long, there's more perinatal mortality. And if you remember the previous presentations and the bibliography, it's easy to understand. So much for the average sow characteristics. If we look at the actual parturition process, we have fewer sows here because we moved all of those who delivered less than 15 total births. So we lost a few sows. And we realized that there aren't that many sows with a long TDR in trial 1. But remember, this happened in daytime, so that was a particular window of opportunity. And also, trial 2 was divided into 2. When the farrowing process starts during the day and when it starts, well, quote-unquote at night, but basically anytime when there's no one around in the farrowing room. So for all categories, we found that in trial 1. The rate of parturition, whether you have a TDR that's short or medium, it's comparable for both groups of sows in the daytime in trial 1. And in trial 2, there are a few differences. So it's better not to have a medium TDR. And that is significant. And also at night, we didn't have enough numbers to consider the short TDR, but we find there's a deterioration in the rate of parturition, which is very significant, as soon as the TDR, or time since last meal, is high. By way of conclusion, we can consider this criterion as an indicator for risky farrowing, particularly at nighttime. The TDR, when you compare it between short and medium, the main thing is that there's a higher risk when you have a long TDR at night, and there's a significant deterioration in the outcome. Now, a long TDR is associated with higher mortality, and this means we need to pay special attention to those sows. Typically, they started farrowing at the end of the night, and the last time that they ate was the afternoon of the day before. So, from a practical point of view, step 1, in terms of reducing the frequency of long TDRs, is to change the dynamics of feeding. For manual feeding, this means pushing back the evening meal or the end of the afternoon meal as much as you can. And when we use automated feeding systems, you can configure distribution or windows and stagger them over time without any problems. Thank you for your attention. I would also like to thank the technical teams that was involved and the students that were involved in the study. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Peter Thiel, who passed late last year. His work was a source of inspiration, and he's been a tremendous help in recent years. Thank you.